Hey, everybody, can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir. I hear you fine. Beautifully.
Okay,
Yep.
perfect. All right, we got people trickling in, so I will I will add them and we'll get started here in just a second. So good to see everybody too. All right, so we will sort through a lot of the, sorry, let me get this situated. A lot of the information that I've got prepared here. Sorry. And then I want to be sure that we leave plenty of time for questions at the end because that seems to be the part that people enjoy the most. If you do have questions or you have comments, like you can put them in the chat as well, and I'm monitoring that as we go along. And so if you happen to have a question in the middle of a topic that we're covering, feel free to drop it in there. I'll kind of peruse those as we go through it, and then try to address those in real time. If there are parts if you ask a question about something that I know is coming up, then I'll say, hold the question because we're going to cover that here in just a little bit. So let me try to share my screen with you so you can see what we've got going. Okay. Can you guys all see that?
Hmm.
Great. All right. So we are going to cover quite a bit, but at the same time, I want to keep it fairly basic and answer most of the questions that most of you have. I think the number one thing to keep in mind about this, because as you guys wrote in questions as we started to prep for this, which were spectacular, there's a number of questions that range from nutrition on the trail to nutrition while training for something on the trail. And there's a variety of people in here that registered for this that range from people that are doing, big mountain expeditions like in the Himalayas to backcountry hunts to doing your local trails. So there's a huge array. The good news about this is that I think the information here is going to fit with everything, no, regardless of what you're doing. But the number one thing that I would say in the years that I've done this that prevents people from enjoying their trips and actually excelling in them is either with nutrition, training, or both. It can be a confusing topic, but hopefully not after this. All right, number one, you have to start with why does nutrition even matter? And I think you can answer this with three very basic and very, very simple points. Number one, it powers your endurance and keeps you strong on the trail. There are two, you will see throughout this as we go through the different sections, there are two major problems that we see across the board. We'll cover what they are. We filter them under the heading of totals and timing. That sounds really, really basic, but it will make more sense as we get into this. Number two, it speeds recovery. I would say one of the most underestimated, often forgotten things from people in this is that if you want to recover, there has to be nutrition in the bloodstream. The most asinine idea when it comes to training and nutrition is the idea of fasting. If you want to recover and you want to train and you want to really, really excel in your training or on a trip, you have to have nutrition in the bloodstream. So this is not just eating daily in your normal training volumes. This is while eating on the trail. Number three, and also often forgotten, is that it prevents injuries. Now, this is a fairly bold statement to suggest that how you eat is going to prevent you from getting injured. But I'll say two things. I'll say number one, what we find, particularly with people who are doing training that lasts over an hour, and zone two is a huge thing right now where you have people and plans recommending that you spend potentially 6, 7, 8 hours on a trail while training. When we measure markers of how insulted the muscle is, we find that there is less insult to the muscle the more fuel someone gets on these long training bouts. This simultaneously ends up meaning that there is less injury. So learning why and how to eat is important. Now, could you just eat and not pay attention to any of this and still do okay? You absolutely could. But I would argue, and you could say that my argument is biased if we didn't have so many people who would prove my argument right. When you pay attention to the details and the details that we're going to talk about in here, you will find that you are able to take doing okay to just an entirely new level and begin feeling like what you feel like you should feel like when people talk about getting this right. We're going to break down, at least for the first, I'd say that we're breaking the presentation down into three different chunks. And the first one is kind of the idea of the three major time points that people think about whenever they're considering doing any sort of fueling for training or on the trail. And that is when you eat before, or what to eat before, what you eat during, if you even need to eat during, and then what about post workout, post training? What should I eat after all of this is said and done? So we're going to cover these in really three different topics. So number one, nutrition before the training. The number one question you need to ask yourself is, when will I be moving? What time period exists between when I'm eating something and when I plan to begin my training? That's going to then give you the answer that you need as to what you should eat. There's three major time points that you need to keep in mind. You can see all of them on the right-hand side. When you have greater than 3 hours from the point that you eat something until the point that you think you're going to start your training, you can eat a full meal, whatever it could be, a mix of carbohydrates, proteins, anything you could dream up, you have. Why 3 hours? On average, it's going to take a mixed meal, meaning a combination of different nutrients. It's not just one isolated thing, about 3 hours to fully process. In other words, there's plenty of time there for that fuel to be eaten and converted into energy. And that's an important piece to remember. People forget that from the point that delicious pancake breakfast becomes fuel, there is a process that happens and it gets converted into fuel. You have to allow for enough time. So if you are eating an hour before, and this is what we see all the time, people will eat a breakfast an hour before, fall apart on the trail, and a large reason as to why that is because the nutrition from that breakfast is probably not even hitting your bloodstream until you are done. So the timing is going to be an important element of it. You can see the next one, if you have less than 1 to 2 hours, what changes here is the fuel needs to be simpler. We don't want it sitting in there forever. The more simple the composition of the meal, the faster it's going to process, the faster it's going to hit your bloodstream, the more readily the fuel is going to be available to you. And then go time. This is where you want liquid calories, honey, gummy bears, things that just have absolutely no lag time between the point of consumption until the point that it hits your bloodstream, so that you're able to be able to rely on that fuel during the actual training event itself. Sorry, I'm gonna mute you if your volume's on. All right. So those are the three time points. The most important thing to remember is that the longer the time between when you plan to train and when you eat, you have the opportunity for a full meal. The shorter the time you want simple to process, it's less opportunity to sit in the gut, more opportunity to hit your bloodstream. Next up, during the training, this is maybe the number one question that we get is, what should I eat in these trainings. So, first of all, you don't need anything if it's less than an hour. Nothing. You don't need any fuel if you're nailing your nutrition, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But there's no fuel requirements if you're training for less than 60 minutes. The two questions that you need to ask yourself, right? So before, you need to ask yourself one question: what's the time period? If you're talking about during, the two questions you need to ask yourself is: how long do I plan to be moving, and what intensity do I plan to be moving at? Now, you can see this is where our two key mark phrases come back up with totals and timing. For the totals, you're going to need sufficient amounts. For the timing, you're going to need sufficient frequency. And then I put these very vague questions there that said, talk about the nuances. And these are the nuances. The total amount of time that you are moving is going to be contingent on how long your training plans to be, but the intensity matters. If it is less intense, you can prolong the period of time you take in fuel. I'll give you an example in a little bit. If it's less intense, the amount that you need can also be less. Prime example: if you are in here and you are an ultra runner and you are pushing up a steep face during a fast part of the course, the intensity is going to be higher. You need to be taking in about 250 to 300 calories per hour, potentially more if your stomach can handle it. If you are in here and you're doing an approach for an expedition, big summit somewhere, and the intensity is fairly low, you may be able to get by with 200 calories every couple of hours. So the intensity in which that you're moving throughout the duration of the exercise is going to determine what amount you need and how often you need it. But everyone in here should be having something every 2 to 2.5 hours while you are moving. You could need more, and you could need it more often if the intensity is higher. Does that make sense to everybody so far? Okay. Protein, because this is the next question. Well, should I be eating protein? You're always talking about eating these really high carbohydrate, type of snacks, etc. Is there any point that you need protein? Yes, once your event begins to go over the 4-hour mark, you're going to want to include some protein. You are not going to want it to be, though, a protein-centric snack, meaning you're not going to want to be sitting there trying to pound down a bunch of rotisserie chicken, piles of jerky, etc. The gut, remember, when you're moving, there's less blood flow to the gut. That means less digestion. Protein is a very difficult macro to break down. That's why we love it for weight loss. It takes forever to break down. It keeps people full. It prevents them from overeating. But that is exactly why you do not want it when you're training. It'll take forever, and you already have poor blood flow to the gut. That means poor digestion, and that means that you're going to suffer a lot of the consequences that people talk about when they talk about trail nutrition. So totals and timing during training matter the most. Higher intensity, more fuel more often. Lower intensity, you can get by with less fuel less often, but everyone should be having fuel in the middle of their workouts if they are exceeding more than 60 minutes. I would say that this is the number one thing that gets fixed with every person we work with. If they don't have good totals and they don't have good timing, we fix this, and that takes away a large percentage of the issues on trail or during training.
So you would basically start, well, I guess that may work, right?
Nutrition after the training. This gets a little bit more complicated, and the person that stares you in the morning in the mirror is the person who gets to decide how complicated they want this to be, because it's largely going to be based on what you can tolerate, right? And so the questions you can see there, I listed 5, but in reality, they are way more extensive than this. When did I eat last? How's my stomach feeling? What's my daily nutrition look like? How long was my training? What type of training was it? Now, you can see over here in the totals column, it says sufficient amounts, and I give 2 caveats. Carbohydrate should be 50% of total calories, and protein should be this little number here. When you are done training, regardless of what your calorie goals are, which we're going to talk about those in a little bit and how to set those based on what your goals are, You want a percentage of those after your training coming from carbohydrates to replace what's been used in the muscle during training. This is particularly important if you are training a lot and you're getting ready for an event and the volume continues to grow. When you're training, you have this cycle going on down here. As you train, you damage the muscle. You eat to repair the damage, and then that's how you improve in the actual training itself. That cycle done over and over again is how you actually improve your physical performance. If you are not repairing the body because you're not replacing those glycogen stores, those carbohydrate stores that are found in the muscle, you will find that as your training grows, either during the week or over the entirety of the program, you just don't have it. You want to push, the desire's there, you want to improve, but you're not. And a lot of that is because those totals are never topped off because you're trying to go too low carb. Protein is 0.7 grams per pound of desired weight. And then you see a bunch of these asterisks here. So 0.7 grams per pound is the point in which the muscle is triggered to begin rebuilding. That is an important thing because that is lower than what most people would recommend. You can go higher, but that is largely going to be based off of preference. If you desire and you like eating that way, then you can certainly go higher. But remember, 0.7 grams is the point in which you begin rebuilding the muscle. And I say that because there are many people that we meet with who struggle to hit 1 gram per pound, and they don't need to be. And so when they start aiming for this, it all of a sudden becomes more doable for them. Because keep in mind, like 0.7 grams per pound is still a fairly large dose of protein every day for most people. Now, the other caveat that's listed with this is it's of desired weight. So if you are above the weight that you want to be at, and you have a certain weight in mind that you want to sit at, you're going to use that desired weight. I'll use myself as an example, right? So used to weigh 270 pounds. Now I weigh substantially less than that. If I had dosed my protein off of 270, I am then suggesting that the fat mass that I had needs protein, and that simply isn't true. So that then also creates a more realistic target for most people is you're not dosing it off a total body weight. The only reason to even have a protein goal is you are trying to put enough protein in the bloodstream to rebuild the muscle mass. So when you step on a scale, that number staring back at you is not all muscle. It's a composition of muscle, bone, water, body fat, etc. Your protein dose is only needed to be set to try to regenerate and repair that muscle. So you can go higher than 0.7 if you want to, but the phrase that we infamously use is doing so is like having boiling water get more boiled the longer it sits on a stove. So keep that in mind, set realistic targets for yourself, and that just becomes and seems to be a lot more doable for people.
Kyle, I had a question.
Yeah.
So on that last slide, the 0.7 by intended body weight is, obviously our daily total. The carbohydrate percentage, is that also supposed to be for our daily or for that meal just after?
We will talk about it.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, good question. But don't let me forget to talk about it, I should say. All right. Now, this slide is important because this is what we call like our hierarchy. So these are the rules that are going to matter the most, and they start from the bottom going up. For any of this to matter, for you to improve at all, you need to be giving yourself enough nutrition to excel in training. I know there are people in here that are wanting this simultaneous fat loss, weight loss while improving performance. It is possible, but you have to then travel down the hierarchy, be sure that you're getting enough nutrition. That will make more sense in a little bit. But you need to be in a state of being able to repair and perform, or the training will never matter. The trip will never matter for that case. So you need to be targeting the appropriate amount of calories based on your need, which we will calculate in a minute. But everything that falls above this, the timing, the micros, the supplements, none of that will matter if the bottom tier is not mastered first, right? Second to that, you go up to the timing. You should pay attention to being strategic with your timing with regard to the training, eating frequently through the day. If you're training more than 60 minutes, getting fuel in on 60 minutes. What is important, though, to remember here is that timing with nutrition, even when training, is more like a barn door, not a minute window. And what that means is you will often hear in nutrition and all over social media, you need to get some fuel in within 30 to 60 minutes of training or you lose the impact of that training. That is not true. If you are nailing your nutrition and you are on top of it throughout the entirety of the day, you have no window of timing there. It is more like a barn door. So, like a simple thing that we do with virtually everyone from the beginning is we say, take your total daily needs and distribute them fairly evenly through the day. So, what that means is if you had a 2,000 calorie daily target, get that in 500 block increments spread over 12, 16 hours in a day. Because what people are often guilty of is they'll have this 200 calorie latte in the morning, a bag of pretzels and a Diet Coke midday, this lunch of, a Snickers bar or a Cliff bar or whatever, and then a 4,000 calorie dinner. You want distribution of nutrition through the course of the day, so there's always something in the bloodstream to pull from. Your body all day long is going into the bloodstream and looking for nutrition for recovery and fuel. And if it is nothing there, you're missing opportunities to progress. And so when I said earlier, could you just eat? You could just eat. But paying attention to some of these little details will mean a significant difference between just kind of getting through training or a trip or really, really excelling and seeing what you're capable of during a certain block or trip or expedition or whatever it is that you're in on here. Going up, macros and quality of nutrition. What does that mean? Why is there a rocket ship there? So the macros and the quality mean these are the micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, and you can see PY or PHYTO there, which is phytonutrients. Now, fancy words with big meanings. Why this matters and why quality does matter is because anytime you're eating higher quality, some people call it clean, but we'll just call it what it is, which is fruits, vegetables, whole grains, like the way that most of us have been told to eat most of our lives. Those foods contain nutrients that combat inflammation that come from training. Training is healthy, training is good, but it is also wrecking your muscles at the same time and creating these little inflammatory markers. That rocket ship is on there because it is essentially like rockets going to blow up inflammation when you eat higher quality food. So can anything fit? Absolutely. Will Pop-Tarts fit? They sure can. But the more often you're choosing higher quality foods, the more you're getting a better bang for your buck for your calories and trying to reduce inflammation so that you can continue to train. Hydration matters. We'll talk about that. Supplements don't matter at all, to be honest with you. There's not a supplement on the planet that is going to take the place of detailing down your calories, your timing, and your macros for all of training. Not creatine, not protein, not anything. There's nothing that's going to matter like detailing down just these simple nuggets here. All right, here's where your calorie calculations come in, because I know there were quite a few people and quite a few questions that came from this. So you've got the loss recommendation up at the top, you've got the maintenance in the middle, and then you've got the surplus, or what I put down there as the big block of training down there below. Now, a few caveats to include here. These are what I would consider starting places, right? And what I mean by that is I would pick a number based on what your goal is. I would do my due diligence in tracking to see, am I even close to that? And then I would assess what my progress is. Based on what I'm seeing from the data that I have in the tracker, from the progress that I am or am not seeing, I would then use that to make adjustments. So the benefit that we have when we work with someone is we know every detail about them, their training, we know their height, their age, I know everything, and I can pretty well pinpoint a range of calories that takes some of this guesswork out. When you do large groups like this, or you do, we did a bunch of nutrition courses for Mountain Tough. You have to give large generalities and give the power to the people to go measure, right? To equip them with the tools to try to assess, are they right or are they wrong? And that can be very, very difficult, but you need to give it time. It's going to take time to work before you start adjusting it. Don't go 2 days in and think that you're seeing nothing and you're wrong. You're not. Sometimes it takes 10 days, sometimes it takes 14 days to see any movement at all. But pick the range that you want to be at, the calorie range you want to be at, and then based on your goal, and then begin to work back or up from there, wherever you're at. Caveat 2, these will change. If you are following a training plan that is progressive, that means it's going to grow and challenge as time goes on. Most training plans are 12, 16, 20, 24, 28 weeks. The challenge that grows with that is going to mean a different focus. So if your goal is weight loss while trying to train, don't think that you're going to be able to complete week 20 of a training program targeting 10 calories per pound of desired weight. One of those is going to sacrifice. You're either going to find yourself binging all the time because you're starving, because you're in week 20 of a massive training plan, or you're going to find yourself unable to recover or perform, probably even beyond week 8 of that training program successfully. So remember that it's going to change over time, and you can use the data that you're tracking combined with what you're seeing with progress and try to assess whether or not you need to change anything in the actual plan itself. All right, we'll have more questions about that in a minute too, if you have them. The composition of those calories, in other words, your macro splits, right? People want to know, like, what's the perfect macro split? This is much more to do with preference, what you like, how you like to eat, what your family makes, than it does absolutes. And that's important to remember. In general, you need to provide yourself with sufficient carbohydrate intake based on the amount of training that you're doing. You need to make sure that you're meeting that minimum protein threshold in a day. And you have a lot of flexibility when it comes to dietary fat. Now, to go back to the question from earlier about carbohydrate intake and 50%, the 50% rule is really a daily rule that you're trying to hit. But you bring up a great point, and this is exactly how I would plan and lay it out, which is that per meal? Well, if you target 50% per meal, then it takes care of the day, right? And I think that that's a great way to look at the planning, is because if you know what you're going to be eating in a given meal, and you can look at that meal and you can say that's 50% of my carbohydrate intake, or 50% of this meal is from carbohydrates, and you do that on every time that you're eating, then that is inevitably going to end up at 50% towards the end of the day. And I will say this too, I would invest some time and sit down and plan. Once you know your target calorie goals, I would sit down and try to lay out how is that going to look, because when we find people really struggling to meet some of these demands, whether it's protein, carbs, fats, calories, any of that, they are generally just eating, logging, and hoping that it lines up at the end of the day. And it will never just line up at the end of the day. There has to be a bit of planning. There has to be a bit of a game plan going into the day. Now, that can be a bit of a challenge when you first start, but it will begin to become like second nature the longer that you get into it, right? So you have to give some foresight. It's not going to just happen, but as time goes on, you'll find that it gets a lot easier for you as well. Okay, meal suggestions. Now, you'll see this little caveat up here that says it's less of a perfection, it's more art and science and preference, and that is true. An important thing to remember is that when we talk about macros, every macronutrient has its own role in human nutrition. The main idea that you're trying to do when you are talking about creating meals, meal plannings, dedicating 50% of your total calories towards carbohydrates, in reality, what you're trying to do is you're trying to make sure that you're getting sufficient amounts of each of these nutrients to accomplish its role in the right-hand column. Carbohydrates are for energy, protein is for repair, fat is for transport. If you have sufficient amounts of these, and if you feel good, there's no reason to believe that you would be off base. And I would say that that's even true with the 50%. If you start counting if you start tracking your nutrition and you find that your carbohydrate intake is only at 40%, but you tell me you feel incredible, then keep it at 40%. There's no reason to think that you need to go make your life harder finding that extra 10%. This is so much more about your personal preference and so much less about this perfect macro split, all of the time. And that is important to remember, because if you get on social media, they are going to tell you that being off by single digit grams in one of these nutrients is what's sabotaging your progress and throwing you into starvation and all of these other words that really mean nothing. There is so much more preference here than most people realize. And I think that that's an important piece to point out, because there's a lot of people that feel like they just can't do it. I mean, the number of people that have, we've met with that say, I just can't get it right, I can't get it perfect. You don't have to. There's much more preference involved than meets the eye. Now, this slide looks like something you would expect from your typical dietitian, and most people probably wouldn't want to eat. It's all this green, healthy stuff, and it can look like that, but it can also be a lot simpler than this. Any protein combined with any carbohydrate with some produce for filler equals a meal. Now, if I were to have sat down with anyone, and we do this, I said, okay, hey, here's your meal plan this week. Fajitas, taco bowls, one dish wonders, which is where we have recipes that you put everything on one sheet pan and you put it in the oven and it's done. Chicken parmesan, Asian broccoli bowls, burgers, shredded pork potatoes. Who's in? They'd be like, this is a diet? Yeah, sign me up. All these is a combination of these things that we put together. And that's it. That is the big meal planning mystery, is just a combination of having a good protein source, having a good carbohydrate source, a good produce source, both for filler and for all of those quality nutrients we talked about for combating inflammatory markers when you're training. Create these meals. So don't let or don't overthink this aspect of it. And remember also that convenient options for a lot of this are available. It takes nothing to microwave some potatoes. You can now buy microwavable bags of rice. You can get leftover rotisserie chickens. There are all of these things that are in packages and in bags and significantly more convenient on the prep side that, many people feel like are off limits because they're in a bag. 100% untrue. So keep in mind that you can make this simple, you can make this convenient, and still be hitting a large percentage of your goals as well. Okay. Hydration and electrolytes might be one of the more confusing topics with nutrition, but I'm going to give you a very, very, very basic rules to follow with this. So first and foremost is these are just some of the points that people will often watch, but these bullet points I think are the most important. Electrolyte drinks for runs over an hour, and then you need to adjust your intake based off of heat, humidity, and effort level. Now this is the spreadsheet most people will tell you that you need to follow. And for people that are in here that are interested in more of the optimal versus the practical, these are the recommendations, right? And so the 400 to 800 milliliters per hour is your hydration when training. And then you got sodium intake down here, which is 300 to 600 milligrams per hour. And then you have your post-exercise fluid replacement. I think this is immensely confusing and unhelpful, and it's not individualized, because for some people, some of the issues caused by training on the trail for stomach problems are because they're getting too much sodium and too much electrolytes. So remember that you can get too much as well. Here's what I would tell you. Number one, for water, be intentional and monitor your pee. If you're peeing dark or you're not peeing at all, you are behind. If you are peeing fairly clear, straw yellow, and still peeing after an hour, 2 hours while training or while on the event itself, there is no reason to think that you need to go trying to get in 400 to 800 milliliters an hour. Now, this is going to take some experimentation. And what I would do is I would try to be aware of how much water I'm taking in, and then notice, am I peeing clear? Am I not peeing? And then make adjustments off of that. But for everyone in here to think that they need 400 to 800 milliliters an hour would be untrue. So even though that is the optimal guideline, it's also not practical for many people because you're already managing so many other things when you're out there anyway. Salt and electrolytes, more is not better. I think it's helpful to replace it whenever opportunity calls for it. If it's high heat, high humidity, you're a salty sweater, you're losing a lot of sodium, then you can replace it. There are a variety and an abundance of different options for replacements than more so than there used to be. So some of them are as much as 1,000 milligrams of sodium per half liter or per liter of water, down to 200 milligrams, which is like your typical Gatorade. For some reason, we think that more is always better and that we need a product like Element, for example. What I have found and what we tend to find is that that much sodium can a lot of time cause nausea in people, especially people who don't need the sodium. So if you're really in the weeds on this stuff and you want to find out what your sodium losses are and how much your replacement is, you can order at home sodium tests, sweat tests, in which they'll send you a strip, you put it on, you go train, you take the strip off, you send it back to them, and they will assess how much salt you lost in a given amount of time. And then you can decide whether or not you need a replacement. But what I have found in the years of working with people is it's a lot easier for them to manage just trying to get in a certain amount of water, being intentional about it. And then if they're going over an hour in hot, humid conditions, getting in an electrolyte that's right in the middle, 500 milligrams per liter of water. So some is good, but more is not always better. So it kind of depends on where you live on terms of optimal or practical. Staying fueled while on the trail itself. We talked about the totals. We talked about the timing. We've not really talked about the general rules. You want lower protein. You want lower fiber. And you want easier carbs, especially if intensity is higher. So there are a variety of different options that you can use in here, most of which like I've included here. So here's some general ideas. Your typical trail mix is going to be pretty heavy on the nuts, which is fine if you tolerate them well. I find that I like a dried cereal combined with dried fruit, like a golden grams and bananas, for example, dehydrated bananas and golden grams, or granola clusters and raisins or whatever. Those tend to sit better with me than a lot of nuts. Energy bars, we have 2 recipes on our website that I will link in a follow-up email so you guys can check those out. They're wonderful. The reason I don't love bars, and you can see this in parentheses, is they often have a lot of fiber, a lot of protein, and this ingredient called chicory root, which can all sit in the gut and create a lot of problems as the bacteria in the gut ferment on a lot of that fiber. So, I appreciate this big push towards healthier, higher quality foods, but a lot of that fiber on the trail can really, really create a lot of problems. And so it's better to try to reduce or avoid it altogether. Fresh fruit, if you got the option, and never doubt the humble PB&J. That might be all-time favorite trail food. Okay. We have a number of questions you guys have written into the chat as well. So I'm going to go through and answer these, and feel free as we talk through these to chime in, ask for clarification, what have you. We'll answer as many of these as we can here. So let me we'll go to the chat first, and then we'll go to the questions you guys wrote in. Do you have any recommendations for grams of protein per pound of body weight when moving for 4 hours plus? I would say that I would go, what I recommend for the trail specifically is dropping it from 0.7 to 0.5. So when you're on the trail for 4 hours or more, I'm targeting 0.5 grams per pound of weight at the 4-hour mark, and then again at the 8-hour mark, and then again at the 16-hour mark. So it just depends on what a person's doing. But so for us, for me anyway, for the death hikes, there's times where we're moving 20 plus hours. Every 4th hour or so, I'm trying to get something that's protein centric to, 0.5 grams per pound or whatever that ends up being out. Let's see. I defer to Kyle on this, but the metric I've known is 1 gram of protein for every 4 grams of carbs for the training in the event, no real grams per pound. Yep. So if you're, the ideal split that we've always talked about for a carbohydrate intake to protein ratio is 4 to 1. So every 4 grams of carbohydrates you take in, you take 1 gram of protein in. That's what we've always said for recovery fuel on the post-workout meal. You can do that, but I would also be lying to you to tell you that if you were to be at 3 to 1 or even 5 to 1, that you're missing out on some opportunity. I think the general rule of thumb is you want to be sure that you're getting carbohydrate in, you want to be sure that you're getting protein in, and for multiple different reasons. One, recovery of the muscle, restoration of glycogen, restoration of that carbohydrate store. The other things that we didn't talk about though were when you take carbohydrate in, it increases insulin. That's a big bad word right now in most culture, but the good news there is that that increase also now stops muscle breakdown. So you want that increase slightly after, you want a slight increase afterwards to begin or to end the breakdown process and begin the rebuilding. So there's this combination of things happening when you do that as to why you want both carbs and protein in there. But everyone's going to be different in terms of personality on where they want to lean towards either practical versus optimal. If you're just a guy that loves metrics and loves data and you really crave the optimal approach, then yeah, 4 to 1. So like typically we might say, 40 grams of carbohydrate, 10 grams of protein, 60 grams of carbohydrate, 15 grams of protein. So you get kind of a 4 to 1 ratio there, but I also wouldn't, if you're getting carbs and protein in, I wouldn't obsess about the nuances either. Are there certain carbs that are better than others for the body, like fruit instead of potatoes? No. Carbohydrates are carbohydrates are carbohydrates are carbohydrates all day long. So when you eat a carbohydrate, let's say that it is a potato that I've grown from my garden, or an apple that I've picked from the orchard that's in our backyard, or a Snickers that I get from the gas station. Every single carbohydrate that you consume gets converted into a simple sugar. That simple sugar has to be simple to enter your bloodstream. If it stays like it is in normal food, it cannot enter the bloodstream and deliver fuel to the body. What matters the most is the dose, right? How much of that are we eating? And that is going to be in accordance to our training needs, etc. So, fruit, potatoes, and a lot of whole grains, a lot of the more natural things you think of also, though, contain more nutrition, more vitamins, more minerals, more water, and those things hold value in recovery too. And so, I think it's find a mix of what you enjoy, but I would not worry about I would not avoid and I would not worry about eating any particular thing, right? So the thing that we say all the time is there's nothing good in nutrition, there's nothing bad. It's always the dose that makes the poison. Let's see, Kyle, for those carb intakes related to hemoglobin A1C numbers, which is a measure of diabetes, what type of carbohydrates do you recommend for people with type 2 diabetes who can't eat grains because they process into sugars most of the time? The question is for training and during activities like hiking and backpack hunting. Is a DIY carbohydrate best for this if we want prepackaged items? All right, so several things to think about here. So regardless of, again, any carbohydrate you eat, it is all going to get turned into a simple sugar. That is a good thing. It's the dose that we need to pay attention to. Now, the caveat that you put in here, which is while you are moving, when you're moving, your muscles are more susceptible to taking up all of that carbohydrate and turning it into energy immediately. In other words, it is not playing or having the same impact as me sitting in this chair, which is what rises blood sugar and diabetes. So the activity element The degree to which that muscle is working will largely determine what happens to your blood sugar. In other words, when you are moving, even as a type 2 diabetic, eating carbohydrates and those carbohydrates get converted into simple sugar, your muscle sees them as rocket fuel. It just processes them. It does not sit in the bloodstream. If you eat that same carbohydrate dose, and you sit on a couch all day, it turns it straight into blood sugar and rises the blood sugar because the muscle is inactive, right? And so that's the important caveat is between are you moving, are you not moving, how much did you eat, and what was a part of the combination of that meal. So would I tell you to eat a DIY option? No. I would tell you to make sure that you are on top of how much of the carbohydrate source of your choice you are eating when you are moving. Make sure you're not getting too much, and your blood sugar should be just fine during that time. But that's an important thing to remember for all of us because the active muscle is what's going to determine that. If you are at the weight that you want, but you would like to gain some muscle mass and lose some more body fat, is real recomp a real thing, or is it more of a unicorn? If real, what calorie level and should the macro split change? All right, so this is a great question from Jeff, and we'll kind of break these down by parts because there's like 3 questions here. If you're at the weight that you want, but you would like to gain some muscle mass and lose some body fat, is recomp a real thing? It absolutely is. You want to create a slight, not a large, but a very slight calorie deficit. The macro composition would not change. You would still want 50% of your calories coming from carbohydrates. You would still want 0.7 grams per pound of total protein intake. And you would want to be very sure that the amount of calories you think are coming in are what's actually coming in. Now, that's the nutrition side. The training side. You would want to make sure that the training plan you're following is a progressive overload format. In other words, you can't continue to do the same thing over and over and over again and expect any recomp. But if you are in a deficit and you're getting sufficient carbs to fuel the workouts, you're doing the work, and you're taking in the right amount of protein to recover from the work, well, we see it all the time. Recomp is 100% real. It's not a unicorn at all. I think Yep, I got thumbs up. All right, good. This is from Chris. I clearly am not getting enough carbs based on this for training. What's a good simple source of carbs besides a Snickers bar? If we think we are insulin resistant, should we be worried about too much carbs? Not if you're moving, not if you're training, and not if your dosage is correct, especially on your normal day-to-day intake. So if you are training, and we're not talking about the trail at all, there still is a dose of carbohydrates that are good for you in a day. If you're training an hour, 2 hours a day in a big training block, but then you're spending the rest of your time at a desk, there still is an appropriate amount of carbohydrate that you should be able to take in to train well and progress in your training plan. Is there a good simple source of carbs besides a Snickers bar? I'm assuming that you're Chris, I'm not sure if you're still in here, but are you talking about while you're moving, while you're training? I can see you, but I can't hear you. All right. Well, oh, here we go.
Can you hear me, Kyle? It's Chris.
Yeah, now I can.
Okay, to answer that question, I would say no, it'd probably be more pre-training.
So you're talking about right before you go train, like an hour before.
Well, when I'm watching macros, I can hit my protein macro really fairly easily, especially with sometimes a protein shake I need. But my carbs have been 100 grams less daily than the number you're talking about, even though I get pretty close to my calories in a day.
So I would say, or I would default, I guess, to my original statement, which was if you're moving, like let's say that you eat something and 60 minutes later you're thinking about going to go train or do whatever it is that you're going to go do, that carbohydrate is going to be metabolized by the muscle. if you get the dose right, right? So, like as a sample example for dosage, you're looking for something that's 45 to 60 grams of carbohydrate. So that's roughly 150 to 200 calories worth of some sort of a carb source. That's an 8 ounce glass of juice. We're not talking about, massive swaths and bags of candy here. They are controlled doses as I'm discussing this. So if you have a controlled dose and you are either in the middle of or getting ready to go or having just finished training, that carbohydrate is going to be metabolized into the muscle itself. Now, as far as the source, you could do something simple, but you could also do any of the other more complex carbohydrates too, from brown rice to oats to any of those other things. But if you're low, my argument to you would be is supplying sufficient carbohydrate will allow you to train harder and make more out of your training. If you're meeting your calorie demands and a large percentage of those calories are coming from protein, your body is converting that protein into carbohydrate in the liver anyway, at some point in your day. When it runs out of total carbohydrate, it is going to begin searching for what's available. Part of that's going to be dietary protein. Part of that protein is going to be converted into a carbohydrate and going to allow you to continue to train. So my argument is it would be a very interesting observation to see what happens if you raise that carbohydrate intake up just a little bit around your training times and see if you don't notice some more energy during the middle of those training sessions. All right, got another question. I get that we make it easier on ourselves on the day-to-day in training by keeping, ooh, you're welcome, keeping each meal at 50%, but for week-long backpacking trips and the ability to recover day-to-day, I gather that we should eat mostly carbs during the day. So should protein and fat be increased in the afternoon or late day-to-day? So I think what you're asking is, should carbohydrate be focused throughout the course of the day, but then we only eat fat and protein at the night to recover? Not necessarily. I would say have a dose of protein and carbs, like a mixed meal in the morning, have something at lunch, have something at dinner. But those blocks in between there, yeah, I'm for the most part trying to get things that are going to sit well with me. But remember, this is really important. I'd say this is the most important thing to take away. You all are the ultimate test. If what you do makes you feel great and you're eating everything I'm telling you not to eat in the middle of the day, but you feel phenomenal, you should keep eating what you're eating in the middle of the day that makes you feel phenomenal. What this is based off of is what we know about performance fuel, what we know about working with people, but there certainly are caveats in here where the rules are different. I'll use myself as a prime example. There's nothing I love more on the trail than PB&J. That's high fat, but it's also good carbohydrate. It's 400 calories with slow digesting carbs in the bread, fast digesting carbs in the jelly, high fat in the peanut butter, but I feel great. Am I going to go taking my beloved PB&J and instead start eating gels and goos? Never, never, never. So remember that for all of you my greatest fear in doing things like this is that I'm going to make you leave thinking there's a perfect plan and that you've got to go invest a part-time job type of hours into this. You do not. Master the nuances, do them with consistency, enough consistency to give yourself the ability to see if they work, and then adjust if you need to. But if you feel great and you're hearing that, oh, maybe like Chris had a good example, maybe I'm off a little bit on carbs. That's an example where I feel like, yeah, you know that there's enough of a gap there that making that gap up might show an improvement. But never forget that the ultimate test is you. If you guys feel great, you're recovering great, there's no reason to feel that you necessarily need to begin targeting something different either. All right, I have a bunch of questions, but with you all here, is there any questions that I've not answered that you want to ask? Feel free to jump in. You don't even have to type them in the chat. All right. We're going to rapid fire these to make good use of your time. Let's see. How to navigate a maintenance phase. How long should it be? If a person is in a deficit, should a maintenance phase be done leading into an endurance event where you will definitely be in a deficit because of high daily output? Maintenance phases they can vary. There's no rules of thumb. I will say though, on average, we see maintenance take somewhere between 4 and 8 weeks, 4 and 6 weeks. The longest I've ever seen it take is 10 weeks. Now, to answer the second part of your question is how should you run a maintenance phase before an endurance event? Absolutely. Absolutely. You should run blocks of nutrition the same way that you do training with deloads, recovery weeks, weeks that you're on, etc. So if you are getting ready for an endurance event, like this example question said, and generally 2 weeks before the actual event itself, you'll take 2 deloads. You'll take a 50% block on week 1, you'll take a 50% block on week 2. I would tell you to keep your nutrition the exact same that it was when you were training. The drop in expenditure with the same intake will automatically take you out of the deficit, so that as you go into the hunt, as you go into the endurance event, as you go into the expedition, whatever it is that you're doing, those muscle cells will have the opportunity to refill with glycogen and protein, recover, and you'll be able to go into whatever it is that you're doing feeling strong. Now, other questions that we had pertaining to, well, what should I eat the night before an event? Should I carb load? Or all of these sort of these ideas centered around preparation for this given event itself. You do not need to carb load in the general sense that we've always thought about, where you're just eating bowls upon bowls of pasta trying to get ready for the event. Your carb loading, your restoration of nutrition should be done in the taper of the training leading into the event. And if you're doing that and you're still eating the same amount, there's no need for this special meal the night before, the weeks before, or anything like that. The drop in expenditure from the taper in the training while keeping the nutrition the same, which was probably higher than usual, will automatically take care of that. The downside to carb loading or being so carb focused in the meals leading into the event that we found is it often leaves people feeling what they say is fluffy. You just feel really full of water. You almost don't feel good when you show up. And if that's the case, then we've kind of missed the point. And we find that just like taking the approach that I'm talking about here basically eliminates all those issues. So that's exactly what I would do if I were in your shoes. Is I would, as my training tapers off, I would keep my nutrition the same and high, and that should take care of any issues that you're worried about as far as loading for the event itself. All right, let's see. Does a man's nutritional needs change as he ages? Yes and no. As we get older, our calorie needs actually only change by 100 calories on a decade by decade basis. So what you need at 50, what you need at 60 versus what you needed at 50 is really only a drop of 100 calories based solely on your age. Now, what we tend to find is when we age, we have hormonal changes. Those hormonal changes make us tired. Being tired makes us do less. We can't go as hard. We lose muscle mass. Those things equate to a significant drop in our calorie needs. So you'll hear people as they age say things like, man, as I got older, it's just so hard to keep weight off. I feel like I have to pay attention and so on and so forth. That is not often because of your literal age and birth date. That is often due to less energy expenditure, less muscle mass, which means a lower daily calorie need, and a combination of these factors. So it's not your age that's impacting you, it's everything else. Now, let's say that you are the holy grail and have found the youth of America, and you feel like none of those things are true of you, you're as active as always. Then no, your nutritional needs as you age are relatively the same. If somehow you manage to find the fountain of youth and keep your same muscle mass, same energy output, etc., then your nutritional needs for the most part are the same. Now, micronutrition, vitamins, minerals, etc., you need more as you age, but the reason you need more is because you don't absorb them as well. So just like we start to see facial changes on people as we age, your organs do the same, right? And so like we'll see people, we used to see people in the hospital who would be 85 and get diagnosed with diabetes, and they'd be so astonished as to, well, how could I, do that? I walk X number of times a week, I eat great, blah blah blah. It's because your pancreas is also 85. It is not 25 and functioning and producing insulin the way that it did at 25. And so we have to remember that as we age, all of these things change, and to offset them with good nutrition is going to largely be dependent on, what you're doing every day and what some of those little caveats are. Any other questions from you guys in here? All right. There's so many in here, I don't know which one to. Some of them we covered in the presentation itself. But if I missed you and I didn't answer it, I am sorry. You can send it to me. Or maybe I'll go through here and just like write each one of you a personal answer. But thank you guys for joining. I appreciate it. We will send out some information once this wraps up. So we would love any feedback that you have, questions, additional questions that you've got, resources, and some special opportunities since you were a part of the class as well. And we look forward to having you on in the future if we do these. See you guys. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, Kyle.
Perfect. Thank you.